We're joined now by Ambassadors Bulus, Lolo and Keshi, who are former permanent secretaries at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We'll begin with Ambassador Keshi. We'll be joined momentarily by Bulus, Lolo. Thank you so much for joining us on Newsnight. Here we are again, another coup in Africa. Let's talk about African peer review mechanism and how effective really is it, especially as it concerns, good governance and all of that. Is that what is missing? Is that what's encouraging these coups in Africa?
Absolutely. Absolutely. It has not been effective, and I'm not too sure it will ever be effective given the mindsets of African leaders. They might take some corrections when it comes to issues of economic development, given what their countries are doing with. But when it comes to this whole issue of democracy, tenure elongation, and the rest of it, I'm not sure that it's effective, at all. And I think I just want to, when we discussed Niger a couple of weeks ago with your colleagues, I was fond of asking 2 or 3 questions. Number one, in advising ECOWAS not to engage in any military intervention, my question was, there will still be coups. Will you intervene in everywhere there is coup? Because one of the things Americans realized, much later was that the very first time they started intervening militarily everywhere, they just don't know where to stop. So if you start with Niger, where are you going to stop? But the truth of the matter is that there will still be coup. And I asked the second question. If there is a coup in certain African countries, would anybody be surprised? If there is a coup in Zimbabwe today, will anybody be surprised? The 81-year-old man has just been re-elected, and the people are contesting the election. And Congo, DR, the guy is probably there for over 40 years. If there's a coup today, will anybody be surprised? Of course. No, this guy has spent 14 years or more. His father spent 40 or 42 years. Yeah. So in the life of the people of Gabon, they just knew of the bongos. Even here, even if you say we are not doing too well in the terms of democracy, since 1999 to today, we've had how many presidents? About 5 or 6, and they've just had 2 in 52 years.
The same family.
Same family.
Now, so would you say that this wave or speech of coups in African countries is a direct request for determinism, or it's just an attack on democracy?
We should be careful how we say this is an attack on democracy. It is the people who has failed to allow democracy to flourish that are responsible for these actions. Look, I don't know whether it was Kennedy or was it Frantz Fanon who once said that those who are not prepared for peaceful change should be prepared for
violent change.
Change.
It's inevitable.
It's inevitable. So if you conduct elections, or you don't even conduct elections, you rig elections the first time, second time, fourth time, and you still remain in power for so long, you create the environment for soldiers. And by the way, look, we need to be very careful in this continent. And I said this the last time I was here. When the first coup happened in Africa in 1958, I believe in Togo, before you could say Jack, it became fashionable for soldiers to just get out of bed one night and then seize power all over the place. We are now having something similar because African leaders have refused to allow democracy to flourish the way it should flourish. So this is a retreat, and African leaders, in my view, must bear the full responsibility. And that goes back to your first question. If they've been talking to themselves, if they've been insisting, this man has been sick everybody would be sick. He suffered stroke for about 1 year or 2. He was in Paris, or Saudi Arabia recovering. He's not feeling well. You are still contesting an election. You rigged the election. People are complaining. The military has stepped in. You can't say people, you can't blame the military that, yeah, we all want democracy, but look, until leaders do the right thing, we will continue to have this problem.
All right, let's bring in Ambassador Bulus Lolo. I believe he's there joining us. Thank you so much for joining us on Newsnight tonight. Let me quote what President Bola Tinubu said in response or reaction to this latest coup in Gabon. He said, look, it's contagious autocracy spreading in Africa, and he'll do all in his power in conjunction, of course, in tandem with other African leaders to ensure that democracy is not threatened, on the continent. What do you make of this? Is this really what it's about, contagious autocracy? Is this what it is?
Well, thank you once again. It's a pleasure to be on the program. And the quote by President Tinubu is a sweet one in my ears, because autocracy in itself can never be an appeal to people. Autocracy would work for short term, but in the long term, there will always be a heavy price to pay. Now, this said, what we are waking up to again in Africa is a retreat in democracy. And this is the reason, in my view, why it is becoming a fashion again, that the civil class, by which I mean the civilian political leaders, make mediation impossible through the games they play. Now, when you are supposed to subject yourself to periodic review, but then you make sure that that periodic review does not bear the fruit or have the effect and the result that is expected, naturally there's bound to be ill feeling. Now, in Gabon, which is where we are dealing with yet another situation that has arisen, with President Ali Bongo purporting to have won a third term in office, and the military as the only other credible and effective force in the country that can resist his moves, has said enough is enough. But yes, our instruments do not allow for military intervention. Our instruments forbid unconstitutional changes of government. But the question we must ask ourselves is, in the event where civil processes fail, what are our options? And that's why the novelty of what the president has said is one in which we should reflect and then find ways to make sure that autocracy does not take firm roots on the continent. In Gabon, since 1967, the only name when Omar Bongo came to office that has been loud in the country, that has been known, is the Bongo name as leader in that country, father to son. Who knows whether Ali Bongo too is planning or was planning that his son Nuruddin will succeed him. Therefore, it is a wake-up call, and it is the absence of an effective mediation mechanism, or arbitration rather, mechanism in the civil class that is responsible. And I hope that every political leader today in Africa, especially those who are holding offices, will rise up to the realization that they have enormous responsibility to fulfill on the continent, so as to ensure stability, to ensure peace, and to provide what every government promises to provide for the people, which is the welfare of the people.
Thank you very much. Let's come back to Joe right in the studio. Let's see the pattern. Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger Republic, now Gabon. What does that portend for other African leaders? Should they be jittery, or should they put their acts in order?
Ambassador Joe
Ambassador
Keshi?
Joe, yeah.
I think they should do both. They should be concerned that this is becoming a fashion. It's like a domino effect that is taking place. You have no clue where this would take place. And even more worrisome in some of these francophone nations is that that these things are happening, and I still express this surprise that France or the French were not aware that something was going to go wrong in one of the countries, they love to stay in Gabon. So African leaders, in my view, should honestly be concerned. But look, it's not enough to be concerned.
Right.
And I'll say what I have said before. The only way out of this is for them to do the right thing. Allow democracy to flourish. Stop extending your tenure in office. Take care of the people's welfare. If the people are happy, if there's development, if you cannot... Look, Gabon is relatively a rich country. It has all the... I mean, to be fair, the economy is even doing better than a number of, but it's not trickling down to the people. Look at your television and see the people on the street. You don't have to be told what's going on in that country and why they are rejoicing that it's all over for the Bongo family. So it's a question of the leaders in this part of the world doing the right thing, allowing democracy to flourish, allowing the institutions. And I'm beginning to argue that, look, we don't just need institutions, we also need strong men who are able to resist the pressures on the presidents, to do the wrong thing.
All right, let's bring back in Ambassador Bulus. Look, Gabon, 2.3 million population, very small. Some would actually say, if you're familiar with Surulere in Lagos, Surulere alone is larger than that population. Poverty level, 33%, unemployment, 28.8%, and that's according to the 2021 figures. But let's talk about the French connection and the external forces that may be giving oxygen to these coups and trying to create, a chaotic situation so they can take advantage or cash in, on that confusion to make away with the wealth of the people. What do you have to say about the French connection especially? Because all of this is happening along the, Francophone Africa.
Right, Ngozi. Before I answer your question directly about the French connection, I will start by asking, are we going to remain fools forever in Africa? That every person will come in, manipulate us, and get away with murder? Aren't we tired of being led by the nose? Aren't we tired of the high levels that you are quoting there of poverty, unemployment, and the rest of it? That for once we will demand our leaders to do what is right. And I heard what my former boss there and colleague, Ambassador Keshi, said about the need for effective governance, provision of common goods for the people. Now, if it is about the welfare of the people, the security of the people, and opportunity being created for the people, we do not need any outsider to tell us, because everybody knows what a good thing is. And we are all looking for a good life in our individual ways. Now, about what you have called the French connection, it is not impossible. But today, how much is French giving back to the colony or its former colony? We are aware and we know that they are cutting away our precious minerals at almost no cost to them. So if we know that these things are highly valuable, and that's the reason why they are coming, how much have we done internally to ensure that not only do we extract, but that we process and at the same time deploy the very products and the proceeds from the products for the good of our own people? When you talk about healthcare delivery, how much of it can the ordinary person get and afford the service? Education, how much of it today is the poor person able to get? And the list goes on. So for me, always when I talk about our continent and its tragedy, it is in the light of exporting employment and then importing unemployment. Because those things that are taken away from us, be it our crude oil, be it our gold, be it our uranium, that is what is taken out of our continent. These things will then be processed and brought back to us. And we use the very scarce resources that we ache every day to earn in order to pay for them. quoting prices as here in Nigeria in dollars. For goodness sake, how many ordinary people, like in my local government where I come from, Jaba local government, if you take a dollar note and ask someone on the street, what is this? And unless the person can read, it is very likely they'll tell you they've never seen it in their lives. So, but if you take a Naira note, or even 50 kobo that is the list, or 5 Naira that is the list denomination, again, you will see people rushing and crowding over you. How much are we doing to go back into manufacturing? How much are we doing to add value to the things that we are that we know we have? And what is it that we are doing to create opportunities for our own people? This is the challenge of governance. And so long as we fail to govern ourselves well and effectively, so long then will there be an attraction, so there will be that window of vulnerability for someone from outside to come and exploit our weaknesses. And I hope to God that we will get sick and tired, starting with the political class. When they mount the rostrum to campaign, they will make that solemn promise to the people that we will govern you in a manner that no outsider again will exploit you. And I do this in good faith.
Ambassador Keshi, that's a good place to bring in the wealth of Gabon, you know, perhaps one of the richest countries in Africa, thanks to the oil reserves of the 1970s. When the country discovered oil in the 70s, they were at least able to build a strong middle class. Let's talk about the commonwealth, the distribution of commonwealth in Africa. If this is better done and we have a bigger middle class, which seems to be disappearing, could this bring some respite and comfort, consolation to the people, such that they do not continue to rise against democracy?
Of course, if you have a very strong middle class anywhere, you probably have less of the kind of problems that we are discussing. Obviously, because you've taken a lot of people, out of the poverty line, and that middle class also constitute the among the best educated, those who have jobs and are creating jobs for themselves. So anywhere you have a large middle class, or even a rising middle class itself, the problems are less than where you do not even have a middle class, or the middle class like us here has disappeared. And again, as my colleague has said, this is exactly what our leaders should begin to focus on. The welfare of the people should be paramount. The security of the people should be paramount.
Right. Let me come in very quickly, still staying with you, Ambassador Keshi. I mean, how best then do you protect democracy in Africa? I mean, some would actually say that, look, African leaders are more, more interested in regime protection than really protecting democracy. Ambassador Keshi, before I, hand it over to Ambassador Bulus.
Look, but that's the honest truth. They are more interested in acquiring power, but then the question is, power for whom and for what? So they get this power. While they are campaigning, they promise heaven and earth. But as presidents, as leaders, they do very little for the people. But they've also established a mechanism where some call it state capture, whereby at every election they do very little, spread money, and everybody is happy. And look, and some people have argued in this country that why they take money from politicians is that that's the best they can get from them every 4 years. And so they take the money and do whatever the politicians want them to do. But the way out, really. Look, sometimes when we discuss this thing, I become a little bit emotional when I hear people say, oh, it is difficult, it is challenging. Leadership is challenging, but look, to govern the people is not that challenging. Just do the right thing. Give them education. Get them out of poverty. Provide them the basic things of life that will make them, after all, the first responsibility of government is the security and the welfare of the people. But where leaders fail to do this, particularly in this part of the world, it becomes a problem and creates this kind of crisis that we are dealing with now. And as I said before, every African leader today should be worried. And if they have sense at all, with all due respect to them, they should call their advisors and say, look, how do we change some of these things? If you stayed for too long, I make that point. Just next door to our neighbor here, the guy has been there for 40 years. If anything goes wrong in that country tomorrow, will anybody be surprised? Of course, no. And as we are discussing this, let me say honestly to Nigerian policymakers, start preparing in case anything goes wrong in Cameroon. Because we had the same situation. Look, when I was serving in Sierra Leone, and we're going to meetings in Ivory Coast, Cote d'Ivoire, it was a common knowledge that everybody was saying that if the old man dies, there'll be crisis. He went off and there were crises. So we in this country should begin to prepare that if anything happens in Cameroon, for example, what do we do? How do we react?
Thank you very much, gentlemen. Ambassador Bulus Lolo, retired Nigerian diplomat, and of course, Ambassador Joe Keshi.
We still have a minute for Ambassador Bulus to...
Yes, I must say a big thank you to you. But before we just let you go, let's have Ambassador Bulus Lolo, let's have your view on strengthening democracy such that this does not fester to other African countries.
Well, number one, and on the issue of the middle class always serves as a buffer between the rich and the poor. But where you emasculate the middle class, you bring the poor directly in conflict with the rich. That's one. And then to strengthen democracy in Africa, in our country, and elsewhere, we must deal with this cancer of invincibility. A leader that believes they can get away with any act without consequence is a leader that is laying a foundation for the destruction of the very thing that he hopes to keep. And number three, no one is indispensable. We each have a contribution to make. And if it is time-bound, respect the time there that you are given, bearing in mind that your legacy will outlive you. But when you choose and you believe that it is you and you alone, you will never get it right. And lastly, I want to put an emphasis on the concept of security, not defined here by the state, which is the wrong notion that we have been living with, that the security of the state is superior and above the interest and the security of the human being. Premium at all times must be put on human security. And it is when human security is guaranteed that ultimately state security will be preserved. But at the end of the day,
Very well
our
said.
politics must be such that, thank you.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Bulus Lolo, for joining us, and Ambassador Joe Keshi. Always a delight speaking with both of you gentlemen. Thank you for joining us.